Okay, I think we're filtering in. I'm going to start on time because we've got an hour. So welcome everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'm Geoff Davis, Key Account Specialist at Cloud Essential. I'll be introducing today's webinar, top and tailing as we like to call it, which is the easy part of introducing what's coming and then the wrapping up with some key takeaways in the end. Thankfully, I've got our usual star team to help and guide us through the session to make it insightful. We've got the brilliant Johan van Schalkwijk, our Managing Director and Head of Solutions, and we've got our fantastic compliance lead, Nivasha Sanalal, to talk all things legal, risk and compliance and how that ties into the technology. So today we're really excited to bring you a first in a series of webinars that we'll be running over the coming months, specifically around data governance. Little bit of background in terms of the reasons behind this series. So we at Cloud Essentials have been having a lot of conversations in recent months, and we're, I suppose, realizing how aware organizations have become in needing to get their data governance sorted out and in place. It's fully on the agenda. And I think the speed of development in the AI space has brought it front and center of mind. We're seeing the data governance, taking a different, I suppose, more positive position within organizations, more as an enabler to AI, and that's if, and it's a big if, it's done properly. And that's where Cloud Essential comes in, essentially. What we do, we make sure it's done properly, done right. We make sure there's executive and user buy-in, as well as showing the true value that it brings to organizations. And that's what we're going to be doing over the coming months. We're going to be unpacking all of this over this webinar series. So stick with us as we show you how the front and center topic of data governance becomes that enabler to AI success within your organization. So the first in the series is today, building a strong foundation for data governance. After today, you'll leave with understanding the adequacy and effectiveness of technology controls in managing your data governance risk, identifying where to start for quick wins, and how to overcome barriers to getting started. We'll also be showing you implementing foundational elements of Microsoft Purview using our 5-step methodology, practical actions to secure sensitive data, and how to gain IT and GRC leadership buy-in, although we dive into that a little bit deeper into one of our next webinars as well. So just before I pass over to the team, a quick reminder as to who we are at Cloud Essentials. For those who have not been on one of our events before, we're a long-standing and dedicated Microsoft 365 partner. We specialize in the areas of content management, so help organizations mature their approach in areas like reducing the risk profile of your content in M365, migrating and managing the content cost effectively, and ultimately opening up the value in content so you can surface it to your business advantage, and especially in today's AI landscape that I've touched on already. We also cover multiple other areas where we have teams of experts, including complex migration projects, backup and retention expertise, also Power Platform application development, expertise around Azure architecture. Also, we're in the world of e-discovery, so feel free to follow up with us on any of these areas, as well as what we're here discussing today, which is data governance. So we've got quite a lot to pack into this hour. I've already taken up too much of that time. We should have a few minutes at the end for Q&A, so do post your questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll come to as many as we can at the end. So without further ado, let me pass you on to our Head of Compliance, Nivasha Sanalal. Nivasha, over to you.
Thanks, Gethin. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Gethin said, I'm Nivasha. I'm the Head of Compliance at Cloud Essentials. And what that means, so I've got a background in regulatory compliance and legal advisory. So I have been in the compliance space and assisting my organizations with meeting compliance obligations and regulatory requirements across multi-geographic entities. Why I'm really passionate and what I do at Cloud Essentials is I assist our clients to deploy Microsoft technologies rather like Purview or Copilot, while still keeping track of their regulatory and governance priorities. So our first topic, we're going to unpack in a little bit more detail how Microsoft Purview does assist you rather with your security and compliance obligations, and just a little bit about its capabilities. So Microsoft really shows its dedication in helping organizations handle tricky data governance issues with tools like the Service Trust Portal. So this is a platform that contains resources for connecting what companies need to do and the best ways in order to keep their cloud data safe and stay compliant. So it works alongside a maturity roadmap by giving their clients a chance to learn more about security frameworks while still ensuring they manage their risks and figure out how the technology can assist them. So the Service Trust Portal, if you've ever gone on, is packed with a lot of useful stuff and insights that is really tailored to your organization. So it's all about giving you the power to improve your information security system in a step-by-step or an orderly fashion. So later on, we're going to unpack a little bit about how we have developed a methodology specifically around deploying Microsoft Purview in order to ensure that you use the technology in a way that's tailored to your organization as well. So with some of the guidance provided in the Service Trust Portal, companies can not only meet the rules that they're required to meet, but also start to build a culture that values trust and accountability when managing their data. So it's very important when using Microsoft to understand your requirements, and understand the various risks you might carry. So in using Microsoft Cloud, you are signed up for what Microsoft calls the shared responsibility model. And here it ensures that you take on the risk that might be inherent to your data, your intellectual property, and the sensitivity that your data might carry, as well as any other regulatory obligations you might have. So any other housekeeping, if we can call it, duties you might have. So Microsoft does give you a powerhouse of controls that you could use, and in the slides that will follow, we'll also unpack some of those controls. And specifically, this webinar is tailored around Microsoft Purview governance controls that could assist you on your journey. So I'm going to hand over to Johan to discuss some of the or to give you an overview rather of Microsoft Purview.
Thanks, Nivasha. So Microsoft Purview delivers the various controls you need to create a comprehensive data security solution that helps you better understand and mitigate your data security risks that Nivasha alluded to. While Microsoft historically separated the two Purview solutions within their solution, one focusing on your unstructured content through what was known as Microsoft Compliance, and what was previously known as Azure Purview. They have since unified these two solutions and now offer a unified data governance and security solution with Microsoft Purview. But today's webinar, we're focusing on the Microsoft 365 Purview or data security solutions. And we as Essentials grouped the Purview solutions into these 6 bubbles, starting up with the solutions that you can utilize to understand your data better. And that includes data discovery. So Purview allows you to scan your content within your Microsoft 365 data locations, but also deploy an on-premise scanner to scan on-premise legacy systems to understand where your sensitive content lives. The foundational implementation or protection that Microsoft Purview offers then is under the solutions that you can use to utilize to protect your data wherever it lives. And that is known as information protection or sensitivity labeling, and then data loss prevention. So those are 2 solutions that work together to prevent accidental and malicious data exploitation, but also through sensitivity labeling, promote collaboration securely through the protection and encryption of content as it lives, whether it's on-premise, in the cloud, external or internal SaaS platforms. Purview also includes a lifecycle management solution through data lifecycle management, ensuring your governance of your content is can be applied throughout its life cycle, from creation through to deletion, whether it is disposed of through a disposition review process or simply deleted when no longer required. Then moving on to the compliance solution built into Purview, that's not really intended to be used by the technology teams itself. And that's known as Compliance Manager. This is it's used to track your maturity of deploying the Microsoft Purview solutions and benchmarking it against industry standard assessments like the Microsoft Baseline Security Assessment or other regulations that you can use templates for. Then onto the more advanced solution from Purview that is offered. The first ones is Purview solutions that you can utilize to address potential risky behavior from your users. And that is called insider risk management and communication compliance. We classify these solutions as advanced solutions because it builds on top of existing Purview solutions by utilizing analytics, machine learning, and more intelligent templates and policies to improve the usability and effectiveness of those solutions. For example, insider risk management can be utilized to monitor and prevent data exfiltration of after user have resigned from the organization. And then last but not least is your e-discovery solution from Purview, where through standard and premium features, you can investigate, enforce retention for legal reasons on content, and also provide your legal representation and other stakeholders in organizations access to the case data for the investigations. So not requiring the old e-discovery solutions where content is exported for these type of investigations and case management. So that's Purview at a high level. As I mentioned, it's very important to track your maturity as you move through the journey of utilizing Purview for your data security and governance solutions. So I think back to you, Nivasha, to cover off how Purview maturity is assessed.
Thanks, Johan. So I think often we do come across clients that might already be familiar to a certain extent with Microsoft Purview, or they might even be using it to a certain extent. But how would you actually recognize if you were using Purview in a way, or how would you measure rather your maturity with the usage of Purview? So what we've created is just some steps and some points that we think is important in assessing your maturity, and that would be so. And again, this is from my perspective as a GRC professional, and it could be your perspective could be slightly different, but we actually live this journey with many of our clients right now across various industries. So what we've noted is the biggest indicator that this journey is going places is that there is some kind of roadmap. And we always say that, and Johan particularly always says, Purview is not an implement and forget type of technology. You have to be using it in order to make it more intelligent, of course, but also in order to make sure that you are managing your risk effectively. So it's not just about the technology. What are the people and process that are attached to your usage of Microsoft Purview? So why we say it needs to be going places, do you have some sort of roadmap present? And again, when we cover our data governance methodology, we will explain how we would get to a roadmap typically. But if you're already using it, do you already have a roadmap? And that's maybe some food for thought. Or do you have some kind of plan of adoption that spans at least a year ahead and that sets out the intention to adopt and mature features within realistic timescales, while still also prioritizing and ensuring that your business needs are met throughout the process? It's crucial to adapt a realistic timescale when adopting any new technology. Your roadmap should tackle areas of high risk first, such as business functions that may handle the most sensitive data, and some kind of assessment should have been taken place to understand and to quantify the risk that you might have currently. So you know as you're using Microsoft Purview if you're bringing that risk down. So the approach will be rolling. It will be a rolling approach rather, not a single one-hit deployment. For example, you could we're going to cover a little bit later how we go about our foundational deployment model and how we do that in a way that still ensures you meet your business priorities, but that you're still advancing your Purview journey. You will also know that your roadmap, it needs to include a lot of stakeholder communication to ensure that when you are rolling out any technology that's specifically to govern the risk of your organization, you are building it in a way that there are stakeholders who understand and are accountable for not only the technology, but also the people and process that needs to accompany that. So what I've included now, also to just bring it into the real world a little bit more, is a snapshot rather of the ISO 27001 assessment that you could find. And we are going to cover in a few slides just the licensing around there and what you might or may not be able to access right now. But if you are already familiar with the standard, or if you're not, ISO 27001 is an international standard that specifies the requirements for establishing, implementing, maintaining, as well as improving an information security management system. So often referred to as an ISMS. So this is a systematic approach to managing the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information assets, such as your data, your systems, processes, as well as the people who manage these things. So the standard itself, and I am aware that we're not going to be unpacking the standard in a lot of detail in this webinar rather, but the standard itself is organized into various domains that cover information security policies, asset management, access control, business continuity, and of course, compliance. So Microsoft Compliance Manager, which Johan took you through earlier, is of course a tool that can assist to simplify and streamline your compliance with the standard by providing you with a visibility, automation, and some guidance for your compliance as well. As you can see from the screenshot, it highlights the various controls and just where you might be in terms of meeting that control rather. So it is a solution that helps to automatically assess and manage your compliance across your multi-cloud environment as well. So Compliance Manager is very handy in the sense that it does provide you with a dashboard that also shows things like a compliance score, and it is based on the implementation and assessments of controls for various standards within your environment, including ISO 27001. So what's also helpful is that Compliance Manager provides recommendations, workflows, templates, and evidence collection capabilities. So you may or may not already have compliance risk management tools that might do similar, but being within the Microsoft ecosystem, it is really helpful to already have that information at hand when starting, with your ISO 27001 journey. So the regulations page within Compliance Manager, it displays the list of regulations and certifications for which Compliance Manager may provide a control mapping template. But what's included across licensing would be the Microsoft Data Protection Baseline. However, the regulations, specific regulations, may require different types of licensing. And with that in mind, I'm going to hand you back over to Johan to discuss where you could start with Microsoft Purview from a licensing perspective.
Thanks, Nivasha. Yeah, so apart from the foundational deployment of the Purview technology that we'll cover off in later slides in today's webinar, there's a few items that we feel is important as starting points to either consider to understand as you move on to your Purview journey from adopting Microsoft Purview for data security and governance. And it starts with understanding licensing options for the Purview solutions. So as you would see on screen, most of the enterprise licenses from Microsoft, whether it's Office 365 Enterprise or Microsoft 365 licenses, include at least the foundational solutions that you would require to get started with Purview. So it is not required to, from day one, jump to the E5 license suite for the Purview security and data governance solutions, but really to plan when you would require those licenses, because it's not if, it's when. Because as you start adopting Purview solutions in a foundational method that we'll cover off later, and you start moving to more custom solutions that fit your specific organization's requirements for identifying sensitive information types, your real crown jewels, and also to move to more automated and streamlined application of the controls, like, for example, information protection and encryption, you would require the higher level of SKU licenses. But getting started with Purview today is not restricted by the lowest SKU licenses available from Microsoft Enterprise licenses. The next topic to understand and really utilize is the built-in usage and analytics available within Microsoft Purview. I think we can move on to the next slide, please, Navasha. So without any configuration on your tenant, or with very little configuration in the specific solutions, you can get very powerful insights and reports on your data estate within your organization, and more importantly, how users are utilizing these content within their day-to-day activities. A few of these useful insights and an analytics mechanism is, as you can see on screen, starts with the compliance score. So this is built into the compliance manager that Nivasha discussed previously, but really gives you a score based on the controls you've implemented on your tenant that aligns with the by default the Microsoft baseline data security assessment. But as we mentioned, you can add further custom or templatized assessment, and your compliance score will then obviously update and reflect as you apply those controls on your tenant. Also within insider risk, just enabling the analytics and allowing it to scan the user's activities across your organization, it can start identifying potential data leaked activities just based on what users are doing and how they are exfiltrating or copying data to external sources. So really giving you your most risky areas to focus in your foundational deployment phase, so you know where and what sensitive information types you should target within your foundational adoption of Purview. Then lastly is understanding your data estate. So right now, all tenants will have visibility of all content types based on sensitive information types within their tenant. And that is accessed through the Data Explorer functionality within Microsoft Purview. With the right permission, obviously, because it can open up the files itself, your security and data governance team can utilize the Data Explorer to understand your data, what sensitive information is stored where within your data estate, and again, utilize that to identify your most risky areas or riskiest sensitive information, and utilize those metrics as you move into your foundational phase, but also throughout your adoption of Purview by starting to automate the controls of your most sensitive or most critical information types within your organization. So those are the three important points that I feel that most organizations need to be aware of as they start on their Purview journey. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I'll cover off more on the technical adoption of the foundation deployment of Purview. But yeah, it's a 5-step process that we have created. And to start us off on that process explanation, I'll hand you back to Nivasha.
Thanks, Johan. So data governance, as we know, is about ensuring that data is handled responsibly with clear rules or standards for things like the collection, storage, access, and use. It focuses on compliance with regulations, but also maintaining data quality, securing your data, managing its life cycle, and establishing accountability. And by implementing all of these elements, organizations can reduce their risks, but also enhance their data governance. So in order to give life to that in the form of both the Purview technology as well as from a governance, risk, and compliance perspective, we've created the Cloud Essentials data governance methodology. So it sits on two key principles. The first is that any controls that are adopted focus on people, process, and technology. And the second is we ensure that our clients take a combined assurance model towards their data governance. So this effectively means getting people from across the business in key or your key stakeholders from across the business on the same page in order to efficiently manage your risk. So these two principles then translate into a 5-step methodology, and I'm going to be taking you through all of these steps in a little bit more detail in the slides that follow. So starting off with our step 1 is to assess and benchmark. So here we look at establishing the risk. So depending on where or which industry you're on, so what are the different types of regulatory requirements you might have? Do you have a defined regulatory universe already? Are there other standards or regulations or certifications that you're looking to obtain, like a NIST standard or an ISO 27001 or similar standard? Then we also, and I think this is where we differentiate, is that we also look at, from a technology perspective, what's already within your ecosystem as a company, not just from a Microsoft perspective. What are you using right now to manage your risk? And what we then do is we take all this information and we help you prioritize a plan. And that information then becomes a basis that we use to help create a risk-based compliance roadmap for our clients. So why we do our step 1 is obviously to try and understand where the biggest risks might be. But obviously within a business, everything, and in this day and age, everything's important. Regulators are releasing new regulations, with AI and the way those regulations are evolving. Everything's important right now, but how do you establish where to start and what's most important? And I think we've already used the term once, where are your crown jewels from an information perspective and from a data perspective, and how do we make sure that's protected as we start or as we go along the data governance journey? So by creating this risk-based compliance roadmap, we help to provide clarity for stakeholders, as well as ensuring that there's continual progression, because often we find that companies might start a program, but there will be blockers along the way. So how do we go about and ensure that those blockers are removed? Having a roadmap, a defined roadmap with timelines and with accountability across the organization really helps. And what also helps with that and is key really is our step 3, which is to assemble and engage. So here we see the principle I explained earlier around combined assurance, where we are bringing together various stakeholders, because we've seen many times in large organizations, it's very easy for things to happen in silos. So when developing a project team or a work stream, it's very important that the outcome of that project leads to the adoption of people, process, and technology at every juncture. And I'm sure many of you have been in meetings before and questioned why you're there or why certain stakeholders aren't there, given the subject matter rather. So it's critical that departments collaborate on their compliance and risk solutions. And one of the key drivers behind effective collaboration between IT and assurance functions is this creation and fostering of a compliance culture, and creating things like a compliance panel where you get various members from across your organization together to not only discuss your compliance risk, but also discuss how you're going to go about implementing controls to manage that, both from a technology perspective as well as from a process and people perspective. So what does this compliance panel look like in real time? So when we set this up, it's often, as you can see, an executive level working group. We have stakeholders from across the company joining us. Usually, if you have a CISO or a DPO, well, typically or beneficially both across the organization, as well as your various governance and risk leaders. So it's really important when forming this compliance panel, you have a good understanding of your business. And I think our step one, where we talk about the various risks and actually assessing where you are, will really help you as well with understanding who needs to be on your compliance panel. So I have seen various iterations of this. I think some people call it a data governance council or data governance committee. Sometimes it will form part of a risk and compliance committee. It just depends. But what really needs to happen is that you have this committee that's focusing on your data governance, not only from one lens, but from a people, process, and technology lens. So our next phase in our 5 steps will be to drive and deliver. So this is where we say, the actual work of technology implementation starts, and where we take the compliance risks we've unpacked, we take the roadmap we've helped you create, and actually put that into action through a defined deployment model. And to take us through that foundational deployment model, I'm going to hand over back to Johan, just to take us through how we go about this in a way that's still effective or still assists your organization to continue with their priorities while still managing their risks effectively. Back to you, Johan.
Thanks, Devasha. So our deployment model for Microsoft Purview solution from a technology perspective aligns with the Microsoft Secure by Default deployment model. And there the intention is to not replace the previous deployment model from crawl, walk to run, but just to improve and fast track the protection of your information while still allowing your organization to mature the data governance and security solutions from Purview over time. So Secure by Default is really designed to, from implementation day, deploy a level of protection to all your content through a default set taxonomy, so basic encryption and a basic watermarking for your organization, and then deploying that into your tenant and really educating your users on how to utilize labeling for managing exceptions, whether that exception is to increase the protection for more sensitive information like personal identifiable information, or when to remove the protection if they need to collaborate with an external party. And the adoption of the Secure by Default model really allows organization, as I mentioned before, to stop the hole and reduce the risk of data exfiltration immediately by this default set of controls they deploy. And then actually utilize the metrics back from the adoption of those core Microsoft Purview solutions like information protection and data loss prevention. So part of this model, as Devasha alluded to before, is then utilizing the feedback and the usage metrics from the adoption of these technologies and default policies you implement in your organization to then drive improvements and enhancements or even automation into those Purview solutions. So identifying locations where users within SharePoint, for example, constantly upgrade a sensitive label with more protection, and identifying those locations and nominating a policy to automatically apply a more secure label to those file types or location through an automated label policy will then improve the users and the capability of the solution, and then that can be replicated to other locations in the organization by targeting those specific sensitive information types that is within those locations. Then obviously the deployment never stops there. As I mentioned before, it's always a feedback loop of monitoring the usage, taking that back to the underlying governance risk and compliance advisory board that will drive the decisions of implementation of further technology controls and automation that is required. So having that embedded GRC led engagement is what differentiates ourselves from just the normal Microsoft deployment model for Purview. Yeah, so I think back to you, Nivasha, to wrap up the monitoring and report part and the integration within the advisory side.
Thanks, Johan. So our step 5 really focuses on, as Johan said, monitoring of the controls that you might have implemented across the deployment model in order to determine the adequacy and effectiveness of those controls toward mitigating your compliance risks, but also being able to report on the success or shortcomings there might be throughout this process as well. Monitoring activities help to provide, as we all know, a mechanism for tracking what is successfully meeting your compliance objectives, but also highlighting any weaknesses you might have. And given the model and the fact that this is also underpinned by advisory function, this often highlights or helps to assist with highlighting weaknesses across people, process, and technology. So, for example, if there may be policies that need to be updated in order to successfully roll out certain technologies, this is what comes across or helps to or gets highlighted rather with our deployment model, but also in the way we monitor and report throughout the compliance panel process with our clients. So with that, I think I'm going to wrap up on our compliance or rather our data governance methodology. And I think a key takeaway, and I'm not encroaching on Gev because he's going to give us some key takeaways from across the webinar, but a key takeaway, I think, from a deployment model and our 5 steps is that when you're going into Purview adoption, make sure that you consider people. So people, your people and your process rather. It's not just about the technology, and we often say the technology just needs or can often be turned on, but is it being used effectively in your organization? And that can only be answered if you have the proper people and process to support that technology as well. Hence, our deployment model and our data governance methodology focuses on those various aspects. So with that, you'll see, given that we're having this discussion on your foundations, we have included sensitive information. We've highlighted it. So my next topic is really around practical actions that you can take to secure your sensitive data. And you might be wondering, why we highlight this, but classifying information based on sensitivity is really it's a critical practice in data governance, and it ensures that your data is handled appropriately. It safeguards, it ensures that you have safeguards for your sensitive information, and it promotes compliance with regulatory requirements. So why classifying your information matters, I think that's key. And I think given the environment we're in now, we're hearing quite often about data breaches, or even with the deployment of AI technologies, it's really important that you have this robust data protection strategy that goes hand in hand, obviously, with your overall data governance strategy as well. So by categorizing your data according to its sensitivity, you can effectively protect your sensitive information. You can maintain regulatory compliance. You can also optimize your resource allocation. So by this, I mean organizations can allocate security and monitoring resources more effectively by focusing on where your most sensitive data might lie. So it also assists you with enhancing your decision making. So clear classification really enables an organization to make informed decisions regarding who can access their data, but also with things like their retention policies, as well as any encryption standards that may be required based and obviously need to be tailored according to how sensitive your data is. So just bringing this back to Purview a little bit more. So Microsoft Purview can of course, support information classification in many ways. And one key solution, obviously, that we speak about all the time would be around your sensitivity labeling or your or data labeling. So Purview allows for the organization, or for your organization rather, to apply labels to data based on its sensitivity. So for example, if there's labels such as confidential or public, it can be applied to files. And obviously that goes with the content. So if this is being shared, depending on how it's been classified, certain restrictions would obviously apply to that. But from a practical perspective, I think often we get asked, how would you go about creating such a, if you want to call it a data classification taxonomy or sensitivity taxonomy? And this is where, again, we reinforce the need to ensure you engage with the right people and engage with your organization. So often we find the most sensitive data would usually sit with teams like your human resources teams, your finance teams. Sometimes it could be contained within certain classified documents that are presented to your board minutes, for example. So it's really important that you meet with those people to understand how that data is managed right now and have that necessary oversight. So from a Cloud Essentials perspective, we often carry this out in the form of workshops with key stakeholders, and then of course still factoring in any compliance requirements that an organization might have, and into creating this overall data classification taxonomy. So also it's very important when classifying your data that you still keep track of the fact that there are several benefits towards it. So it's obviously improving your compliance. So there are various automated tools that you could use to streamline your documentation, as well as the enforcement of certain policies, making it easier as well to demonstrate compliance to auditors. So for example, in the case of the GDPR, you also need to be able to track and log where your sensitive data is in the event of an audit. So this obviously puts you in a stronger security position. It increases rather your security posture and your overall data governance, because your sensitive data is being protected with appropriate controls, and it really reinforces that risk-based approach that we've spoken about throughout our program as well, to ensure that there is effective risk management in order to ensure that your resources are obviously being used where it's needed most. But what we also find that completing or going through this process of establishing an effective classification scheme for your company, it also helps to enhance collaboration across the various departments, as clear classification ensures that teams can still share and collaborate, but do so in a very secure manner without compromising sensitive information. And of course, this is very important when using generative AI tools as well. So I think with that, I'm going to take us through next time, like looking at the time, we have some time for questions. And I know we've just provided a lot of information, but we are giving everyone an opportunity to raise any questions that you might have on the content that we've shared.
Yeah, thanks, Navasha. Thanks for that, team. That's some great insights as always. I've got a list of some common questions here, Navasha, that I think would be a good place to start. So if we maybe jump into some of those, because these are questions that have arisen from a lot of the discussions I've been having. You've been on those calls as well. So I think it's a good place to start with some of these. So the first one I've got is, who should own or be responsible for the implementation of Purview? Do you want to start with that one, Navasha?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gert. Yeah, definitely a common one. I think given the nature of the requirements that they are compliance requirements or regulatory compliance. But if you look at Microsoft Purview, as a GRC professional, I would immediately default to, okay, this seems like an IT function. But then when you start unpacking Microsoft Purview for what it is really a tool that has been designed to be used by professionals such as myself, by GRC professionals. But also, if you look at data governance and you look at the consequences of poor data governance, often the controls around that sit within your GRC teams. And by no means is it, is it just one person? That's why we often, throughout our presentation, we talk about how important stakeholder collaboration is. And even in this instance, so from a implementation perspective, or from a deployment perspective, you could of course call on your IT teams to assist. But from understanding how the Purview technology actually assists you with your overall compliance posture and your data governance, I would say this sits very much with your GRC, your governance, risk, and compliance team to assist with you.
Perfect. Thanks, Nivasha. Another one I've got, which is in line with something that came up earlier in your presentation around sort of maturity with compliance. So, what specific tools within Purview could we use to track and evidence compliance maturity? Johan, is that more your basket?
Yeah, I think so. I think I covered some of it within the discussion already, but it's done within the compliance manager and through various functionalities. So by default, as I mentioned, all tenants have a compliance score based on the Microsoft baseline security template or assessment, and that's based on NIST, GDPR, and few industry standards already, and that gives you already a maturity rating of your controls that you've adopted or applied within your tenant, and then you have got the ability to create or buy additional assessments if you don't have the right licensing. You do with premium licenses like E5, you do get three free assessments that you can then also include in the calculation of your maturity. So, for example, you can buy the assessment or activate the assessment based on NIST or ISO standard, and then also get the maturity score for those controls, and then use those to not only gauge your maturity level of adopting Purview within your data estate, but also have means of controlling and gathering evidence that you would need to prove that you have adopted and implemented those standards and regulations within your organization. I think you're muted, Ketan, sorry.
Yeah, I've got to do that at least once during a live event. One more I've got here, which again we've covered a little bit of it, but maybe just expand on it. So what are some common barriers to getting started with data governance, and how can we overcome them? So it's part of, I guess, what we do as our methodology during the process. But yeah, a little bit of an expansion on that. How do we overcome those barriers?
Yeah, thanks, Geth. I think I'm going to start with that one. So it's exactly what you said. The formula, or our formula for success, or rather our five-step data governance methodology, was created to, help overcome those barriers. But what we often find is, and I suppose this goes back to your first question as well, ownership. So not knowing where to start or who should start with the process, but also sometimes not having the people and process to support the technology implementation as well. So, for example, when deploying Microsoft Purview, you might need certain documents. So do you already have a retention policy, for example? If not, do you need to create one? Has there been sufficient engagement with the various, so with your DPO, for example, with your governance teams to assist you with creation of that? So again, some of the barriers we often find will be around people and process. And that's why we've created this methodology to help around those areas in particular.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. I think I probably will go over to me now to wrap it up, Nivasha. So maybe if we move on to that final slide, as we've got a few minutes left. So yeah, just over to me to wrap it up. There's a few things that have come up, again, as we speak about data governance that are just, for me, key for making it a success. And we've gone over them again in some of those questions. And more importantly, I think, that success is driven from our experience of doing it. So the first one there that we've highlighted, and we've said it a few times, is the integration of people, process, and technology. Just from experience, we've identified this integration as, just essential for successful deployment and management of data governance solutions, ensuring that technology is effectively utilized throughout the organization. So turning it into an enabler rather than a blocker is how we look at that. The second one there, we touched upon it towards the end, which is the importance of identifying sensitive data. So we discussed the need for understanding what constitutes sensitive data within the organization. Again, extension on the previous point, it's a risk-based approach. So engaging with stakeholders from various departments to identify critical information is crucial for effective data governance. Also as that starting point to getting this going as well. And then the third point, which ties in nicely with sort of the next steps, building a business case for data governance. We've broadly spoken about around this topic today and how our methodology builds this sort of buy-in, if you like. But also this topic ties in smoothly with what's coming next. So that upcoming webinar will focus on, things like strategies for gaining executive buy-in. So we're going to go deeper into that and demonstrating ROI for data governance initiatives. So we're going to provide tools, approaches, real world examples for, executive buy-in. So looking at the different personas that we have experience with through the deployments that Cloud Essentials have done in the past and are doing right now. We're looking at the benefits of a structured approach, understanding cost savings, risk reduction, and compliance benefits, and then those real world success stories of implementing effective data governance as well. So that next webinar will be on the 1st of July. Look out for the invites that will come out on that, and please do sign up for it. Another thing I wanted to mention towards the end, excitingly, myself and the team are going to be at InfoSec Europe in London from the 3rd to the 5th of June. So if anyone is coming along, please let us know and we'll make sure we get some time with you on the day, face to face, which will be a nice novelty. And then just a reminder to sign up for the webinar series, details of which will be in our monthly newsletter, which most of you get as well. On that note, thanks very much for your time today. Thanks for being involved, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thanks very much.